and you feel like you're getting to some kind of climax. You're getting close to Abby, or Abby's going to be getting close to you. And then, bam. Sam's cup of tea. Sam's cup of tea. First things first, if you're new to the channel, please hit the subscribe button. I'm quite a small channel, as you can see, and every single subscriber and like and support really, really counts, and I really appreciate it. So thank you very much in advance. Okay, so just as a warning, if you haven't played The Last of Us Part 2 or you don't want spoilers, please stop the video now, because I am going to spoil certain elements of the story and the game in general. So that's just to warn you, but let's begin other than that. Let's start with my impressions of The Last of Us 1. So The Last of Us 1 came out in 2013, a much simpler time, let's be honest. A time before Donald Trump, before COVID, before social media had taken such a hold on our society. Things seem a lot more polarizing in 2020 than they did back then. Things seem quite quaint looking back even 7 years ago. And in some ways it feels like not long ago, and in other ways it feels like a lifetime ago. When The Last of Us Part 1 was released, I just graduated university and I instantly fell in love with it. It was a masterpiece. And it was widely received as such, and rightly so. It was a concise story, and most of the game you played from the perspective of Joel. It was just a brilliant, brilliant game, and I loved every aspect of it, from the story to the music to the gameplay. I thought the gameplay was fantastic in The Last of Us. I couldn't get enough of it. So much so that I recently played it again, remastered for the PS4, and I completed on Grounded. So I think I've completed The Last of Us 1 4 or 5 times at the very least. I love it. It was just one of those games that just hit the perfect note at the right time, like a God of War type game or Red Dead Redemption. Just something that just strikes the right chords in people, and it does has the right balance of things. Basically, all of the characters in the game were memorable, well written, likable. The journey itself was harrowing, and it had that perfect mix of kind of survival horror with the element of the infected, so it was almost like a Resident Evil type. But then it had this kind of switch a quarter of the way through where you're playing against guys, other cannibals and scavengers, and so that changed up the combat. And so it's this mix of stealth and real visceral fighting with anything you've got, and you had to craft materials and meticulously think about it. And actually the game is even more interesting once you ratchet up the difficulty. Once I started playing on Survivor and Grounded mode, the game took on its own life, and you really had to kind of figure out how to do things, and it really makes you feel vulnerable, and it's just a great experience all round. One of the things was that the game ended on a kind of question mark note. The crux of the ending is basically that you finally reach your destination. You get Ellie the cure to the Fireflies who are going to extract the cure, but then you find out that she will actually have to be killed for that, and they've already put her in sedation. And so Joel, or you, the player, makes the decision to basically kill everybody and get her out at the expense of potentially the cure for the world. And that's the controversy, and you kill, basically everybody in order to get her out. And she doesn't know, and when she wakes up, he lies to her unconvincingly, and you're not sure whether Ellie really realizes or not. But anyway, that's how the game ended. And I remember thinking, whoa, they've got to explore that in the next game. I don't like putting demands on sequels, because I like to be surprised, and I like the developers to have room to do what they want. I'm not the writer, they're writers for a reason, right? And directors and all that lot. So I don't like to put expectations and demands on what I want from the story, but that was definitely a crux that I expected them to explore in part 2, and we'll get to that. So anyway, Last of Us Part 1, amazing game from a simpler time, and the reaction to that game was basically positive all around the board. Probably a few outliers, but there it is. So 7 years later, we've been waiting for this game for 7 years, which has felt like a long time. A couple of years back, we got a gameplay reveal, which was impressive, no doubt, but I try not to get too excited back then, because I knew there was a long time to wait. It was almost like, when you're so excited for something, you don't want to be counting down the days 2 or 3 years, in advance. You don't want that. So I kind of tempered my expectations. But there was a great gameplay segment with Ellie, and she was against some religious guys, and it looked great. And I assumed that this game would be from the perspective of Ellie, but who knows, right? So anyway, 2020, COVID. And not only that, the pandemic, which has changed everything. We also had a delay in The Last of Us Part 2, and then the leaks hit. And the leaks were a big, huge dampener on the game in general, at least in terms of the surrounding mood. Huge plot points were revealed through this huge leak. Basically, there was another playable character called Abby. She had huge muscles. She looked like perhaps she was transgender. People weren't sure. But we knew that Joel died by her hand with a golf club. That's what people had figured out. I saw these leaks, having stumbled across them, being a content creator myself. A lot of the channels that I followed were all discussing these leaks, so I couldn't escape them. And I felt like this game had a real weight around it. It was a lot of friendly fire coming back and forth. You know, people on one side who were just ultra fans who wanted to love it, and then people who were like ready to hate it. And it was a very toxic atmosphere coming in to the release of this game, which you cannot really mention this game without it. And I feel like it has, even for me, when I was playing it and when I was trying to filter out, it was really difficult to filter out that noise and think, what, you know, would I have a different interpretation of this game without all of that meta, you know, noise and white noise, you know. So the beginning of Last of Us Part 2 picks up some years later in the safe compound of Jackson where the first game ended, and some years have gone by. But what you immediately realize is that this game won't just stick on one perspective. It shifts around a lot, and just within the first 20 to 30 minutes there's a few time jumps and even perspective jumps. So you start out as Joel, you see a scene, and then all of a sudden you're Ellie, but it seems like it's a couple of years later. And so there's this dynamic introduced very early on, and then I think about 10 minutes after you've been playing as Ellie, or there's a part way through it skips to Abby. So within about an hour, you've played with three characters. You only play as Joel very, very briefly. But the point is that you get the sense that this is a very different, a game that's trying to have much of a broader scope, more than the first one. The first one started out as Joel, and then it cuts, and then you Joel later, right? This one, it's like Joel, and then it's Ellie, but some years later, then it's Abby, then it's Ellie again, and it kind of switches around a lot. But the opening couple of hours, for me, were very strong. I really enjoyed it. Whatever was going on, I was really engaged in what was going on, because it was familiar to me. I understood what was happening. I knew where they were. It starts out in a place of quite relative safety. You see that Ellie's grown up a bit and she's matured, and you're interested in this new character, Abby, and the way she's introduced without any context is quite interesting. You're just giving the player, you know, just giving control of her, and you're like, what's this? And it's in a quite horror context, and you're getting attacked, and so you do feel quite like, oh, okay, this is great. And then very early on, and spoiler alert, there is the Joel scene, and it builds up, and the way in which it gets to Joel's death, I found, and some of the people really hated this, but I found it really interesting that you were playing as Abby, and then all of a sudden she's looking for Joel. You know, when you pick up as Abby, they're hunting Joel, and then all of a sudden she gets rescued. You get rescued by Joel. It's Joel! It's Joel! And you're playing as Abby, and Joel and Tommy are, you know, fighting off the infected, and you escape with them, and then she ends up luring them back to where her friends are, and then that scene takes place, and just as it's boiling over, it cuts to Ellie, and you have to kind of run into the house. And honestly, that whole segment was one of the most emotionally heavy things I've ever played. I mean, even some of my favorite movies haven't affected me that. I had a pit in my stomach, a real pit. And I was streaming, and I remember my sister was watching, and she said to me multiple times on the chat, I feel sick. She said, I feel sick. And that's exactly how I felt. I felt sick. And for a game to do that is very And some people say, oh, it's just shock factor. You know, anyone could do that. It was the way it was done. You know, even before the actual moment of his death or where he was killed, it was the dread. It was the fact that you just knew something was going to happen. It was going to go wrong in some way. And I thought that was really well done. It really depressed me. And I didn't want Joel to die because I love Joel as a character, flawed as he may be. But I thought that was really well handled. I don't understand all this picking apart and stuff like that, because in the moment I wasn't trying to sew out the logic of it. Why would Tommy tell them their names and all this sort of... I didn't think that at the time. I was just like, oh, you know, maybe they let the guard down, you know, like you do. They've been in Jackson for a long time and maybe they've just gotten soft. We don't know. When there's been a time jump like that and things are cutting around, you know, you've got to assume a certain amount, right? You've got to give the writer some freedom to say, you know, this is how things are now. You know, you don't own the parameters. You don't own the characters, you know, on screen, on game or whatever.
You don't get to rush this.
Who is Abby?
So then post Joel's death, which is a real shock factor moment, you carry on as Ellie in the aftermath, and you know, going into Joel's house and seeing his carvings in his guitar was really gut wrenching and really emotional. That's his watch that his daughter gave him at the beginning of the first game.
His own daughter?
Yeah, that he always used to wear. The one that died. And then Ellie sets off on this journey for revenge, and Dina joins with her girlfriend, and you go from there. And I really, really enjoyed that momentum, even from that point. Playing as Ellie, it's this darker, more edgier version of Ellie, and you have an objective, and you know, you're like, right, this is it. You know, I'm gonna brave the perils of the open world of Seattle. You travel to Seattle, and all of the new gameplay dynamics are slowly introduced, and character enemies, just like in the first one. You know, first it introduces the infected, and then more infected, and then human enemies tend to be more difficult in a certain way because they're more agile, more unpredictable. You have to think on your feet more, so you have to be more well acquainted with the game's mechanics, and that's exactly what the first game did. The first game focused primarily on the infected for a while, and then it introduced the human characters. And what's crazy about this game is that it introduces both, and you can actually use the infected against the human beings and vice versa. It's a great system. And what I immediately noticed was the gameplay and the gameplay improvements that have been made. There's been a lot of crazy tweaks to the gameplay to make it more fluid. The animations are buttery smooth. It's fantastic in that way. You're on this journey for revenge as Ellie, and it builds and it builds and it builds. And what I liked was you have these sort of landmark moments when she finds one of Abby's crew, for example. So she's looking for the various people. The one criticism I would have is that you see Abby's crew at the beginning when Joel gets killed, but it's over before you know it. And you're so focused on Joel dying and not dying and, oh my God, that you're not really taking in her group. Who are they? What do they look like? It was just 4 people. The one you really remember the most is Abby, and she's not introduced until much later. So Ellie's going around and she finds the first person from Abby's crew, and you kill them in a confrontation. They almost get you and stuff. And then you're making your way to try and find Abby, but in order to do that, you're kind of getting through the group to try and track her down. There's a great big set piece in the hospital when she finds Nora, which is one of the Abby's crew, and it's kind of the first moment when you see Ellie really turning, you know, and it's like she's quite cold-blooded in it, and she might be losing herself in it. Now, you know, a lot of people have talked about the fact that you spend most of the time killing, and some people say, well, you can play the game and you don't have to really kill people, but you know, you are going to be killing people. You just are going to be killing people. No one's that great at the game the first time. I mean, I'd completed the first game on Grounded, and the mechanics are quite similar, but they're different enough to throw me, and I was playing on normal, and I kept getting seen, I kept getting into altercations, especially when the human characters then introduce the dogs, and they sniff for you and stuff, and it's very difficult to get through this game and not to kill someone. It's kind of unrealistic to think that anybody would. So you do have a lot of blood on your hands anyway, just from random characters. And then so when they make a big deal out of this one character and Ellie's kind of got this shell shock, it is a little bit jarring because there's a kind of like that's probably where the gaminess of it intrudes on the authenticity. If it was a movie, it would be different because I wouldn't have had bashing people's heads in. But anyway, that's a small criticism and I can overlook that. But yeah, I really enjoyed the whole aspect of Ellie building up. It feels like the first game where it's building. You're getting to new enemies are being introduced. The ante is being up to every aspect, and you feel like you're getting closer to Abby, you're getting closer to revenge, but it's getting darker and darker. The Seraphites are introduced, like a new enemy type, which are distinct from the WLF, which are the other more military type human enemies. The Seraphites use bow and arrows and they whistle and it's disconcerting and it's really clever. And then the new infected, like the Stalkers. Oh god, the Stalkers were terrifying the first time I fought them. Oh my god, there's another one.
Oh my god, you cheeky bastard.
And the bloaters and I can't remember what the other one is. There's another one that like kind of blows up. I can't remember. Yeah, so the new infected are great. The Shambler is the one I remember. The Shambler runs at you and it's kind of like, it's a bit similar to the bloater. He's kind of more, he runs and then he kind of lets this gas out and he looks disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. And throughout this portion with Ellie, they do something really clever, which are these flashbacks. And the flashbacks vary, but they're mostly between Joel and her's relationship, primarily, over the years. So it fills in, sort of retrospectively, the complexity of Ellie's and Joel's relationship up until his death. So you realise why there was a little bit of animosity between them when they last saw each other, because that's not quite explained. And it's all explored in these different sections. And there's one standout bit which I have to give praise to, because wow, is a moment when Ellie and Joel visit the museum and it's her birthday. And it's when Ellie's younger. It's one of the few scenes when she's younger and there's not any fighting in it. There's no combat. And it really takes its time, but it really earns it. And they go throughout a dinosaur museum, and there's loads of jokes about Joel. All of Joel's facts derived from Jurassic Park, and he's like, "We have to watch it. We'll watch it when we get back to Jackson." And then they go to the space museum, and she knows loads about space. Ellie's really into it; she's like a geek. And then they get into the shuttle, and it's all been planned because it's her birthday. And once they get into the real shuttle that they use, the Apollo shuttle, he gives her this cassette, and she puts it in a little cassette player, and she puts her headphones on. And he's like, "Put the helmet on," because I picked up a helmet and blocked it on one of the astronaut helmets, and it's like a countdown sequence, like a real countdown sequence, isn't it? And the camera just moves and simulates her imagining that she's actually in space, and it is just a beautiful, beautiful moment in a game, and it literally reduced me to tears. I was playing it midday on a Saturday, and it just broke me. Absolutely broke me. I've got the footage here.
Close your eyes. It'll be worth it.
Oh, look, his eyes are watering. Oh.
30 seconds and counting. Astronauts reported fuel first. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting.
Oh.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
is that? That's so clever.
I do okay.
Are you fucking kidding me?
That fucking floored me, that.
You're welcome, kiddo.
Because like, that's when you're a kid, that's kind of like...
Well, what do you say we keep looking around, huh?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, and he's trying to, yeah. And she hasn't had that innocence, has she? So he's giving it to her. He's trying to give it to her. But yeah, it just broke me. And such clever writing that was. And that whole scene was just beautifully done. And, you know, for those who are upset and depressed that we don't have Joel in this game, that he gets killed off earlier, it was a great way to have our cake and eat it at the same time. We got the Joel climactic death that we knew was probably coming. But we also got that moment, that real timeless moment, which was a very rare ray of light, and a much more tonally consistent with the first game than this one, which is a lot more darker and revenge driven and blood soaked and depressing, frankly. But it was a beautiful moment. And one thing that I noticed, and I don't know if it was deliberate, but they really make Ellie seem like a little girl in this one. And it's all about Joel creating this artificial childhood for her in this moment. He takes her through the museum and he gives her the cassette, and it's kind of like giving her this childlike imaginatory moment, which is so rare in the world that they live in because it's so cutthroat and very gritty and based in reality. And I think he wants desperately to give her just a little nugget of normality, just for a moment, and he does succeed. And there's this great moment when they get out of the shuttle, and she reaches down, and as she bends down, she takes her backpack off to put the Apollo badge in her bag. You see the camera it shows the gun on her belt. So just as that moment passes, it's that reminder of like, no, she's not a little girl. She's actually lives in this world. She's got a gun. And it's a normal thing. It's not frowned at. She has to carry the gun, right? And it's just that reminder of, unfortunately, she has to be more grown up than that, and that's the world she's lived in. And it's a great moment, and I really praise them for that. And there are other moments as well where they explore the complexity of her finding out the truth, which is amazing. And I loved all that. Absolutely no qualms with that at all. And you get to fight alongside Joel against a bloater, and it's just fantastic. And it explores the burning question from the first game. And all that's great. And you get through to Ellie, and you feel like you're getting to some kind of climax. You're getting close to Abby, or Abby's going to be getting close to you. And then, bam. And this is the midpoint of the game, but you don't know that at the time. It switches perspectives. And right at a moment when you're going to Abby's facing you, Ellie, it switches perspectives. And it goes right back to showing Abby's perspective. And you know immediately what they're doing, right? You know, like, oh, right, okay, they're going to build up Abby and make her a sympathetic character now. Now, my problem wasn't with that. My problem isn't with them doing that. And actually, over the course of Abby's campaign, I did become more close to her. I did empathize with her. I liked her as a character, genuinely liked her as a character. My problem was with the pacing, what it did to the pacing. What happens is, in the first Last of Us, you have a sort of upgrade system, right? A feeling of character progression that is only interrupted momentarily by playing Abby as Ellie, a small point in the first game. But in this game, you get this, and you go right back to playing as Joel, and you've got all your equipment that you've built up over the game. In this one, I felt like I'd not even utilized Ellie's equipment, and then her campaign was over. And you're basically Abby for the rest of the game until the final bit as Ellie, which is, but it's kind of a jarring experience, and you realize, the way a game works, because it's constrained by the game. If this was a film, it would be different, but it has to go through the whole, system again, where you start with weapons that haven't been upgraded, and you have to go the bench and stuff like that. And this is where I started to see almost like the seams of the game, because of the time it was taking. When you do something repetitively over a course of a time, you start to see the structure of it. And the thing with The Last of Us is that the design, the way that Naughty Dog designs it so painstakingly with its detail, is to be immersive, right? You don't want anything to break that immersion. And of course it's a video game, sometimes that will, but the problems were that by that point, I'd played it for so long that I was starting as a new character and I didn't know these people. And for a while, Abby's campaign, like it starts, then it's like day one. And as Ellie, you play through day 1, day 2, day 3. And you think that immediately sends a click in your brain. You're like, oh, they're doing day 1. So that means I'm doing day 1, 2, and 3 at the very least. I mean, that's taken 10 hours at least. It's taken more than that. So you realize like, oh my God, I'm just not even halfway through. And it does sort of stunt the immersion. It does jolt you out of the experience a little bit. And I will admit for quite a bit of the day 1, I was sort of going through the motions, and it introduces you to WLF. And even though some of the things are intrinsically interesting, like it's widening the world, it shows you the WLF's base and the fact that they're using a football stadium as the thing. But then it starts introducing the crew. And while it does a good job of humanizing Abby over the course of day 1, 2, and 3, it starts out very weak, especially with her crew. Abby's section of the campaign feels unwieldy because it feels like one big false summit after the other. The initial thing is a false summit. You think you're at this climactic point in the game. And while I love shocks and changes, I felt like this game did it so much that it exhausted me. It's a bit like The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi subverted my expectations so many times that I sort of stopped caring. I was just like, oh, well, this is going to not be the end either. And, you know, in good storytelling, you've got only a finite number of those kind of tricks up your sleeve. And if you use too many of them, I think the audience gets fatigued by it. And that was the first false summit. And there's a lot of false summits. And you just don't know where Abby's campaign, is going. You can see what they're doing. They're trying to, show Abby's journey throughout this time as well, and show that, look, both sides are kind of equally complex and equally, even Abby's crew, Abby herself is in the WLF, but she actually doesn't really identify with that crew, and da-da-da-da-da. And what I would compare it to is like a game like The Witcher, for example. The Witcher, you play from Geralt's perspective, and in order to serve the story, you're looking for Ciri. And throughout the game, there are these like strategic flashback moments where you play as Ciri. But because of the structure of the game, you're playing as Geralt, and you've got all these stats and items that you've been building up. You can't switch the game over to Ciri and start again with the item progression. So what they do cleverly is they have these more linear moments with Ciri where you don't control the stats, you don't have items, she's just super powerful, and you do a few playable interactive moments of her that fill in a little bit of her thing, and then we go back to Geralt with your player progression intact. This is more of an unwieldy, in my opinion, kind of wrong way to go about it, which is to just go, right, let's start the whole thing again. And it feels like this huge ship's being turned, and it requires so much of the player to kind of push through that day 1. And even though you're like, oh, I know that they've put loads of work into this, but I just feel a little bit bored. I don't feel like that momentum that they earned is there. And it's not until day 2 and day 3 that things start picking up. But by then, you've been playing the game for like 20 hours. You've been playing the game for so long that even the shocking bits are like things you've seen before. You know what I mean? Like in an impressive package. And it just introduces even more characters. And this is where I'm going to come on to characters, and I'm going to come on to gameplay as well, because there's a lot to say about that. So Ellie, let's start with Ellie. Ashley Johnson. Ashley Johnson's incredible performance in this game. Amazing. She's brilliant. I liked elements of Ellie in this game. What I will say is that I understand that this story is the theme of revenge, and it's darker, and it's about her making a lot of mistakes, basically, missteps in her life. So what I will say is that some of her DNA from the first game is forgotten about. There is just a very, very severe lack of humour from her throughout the whole game, apart from in the flashbacks, and it feels like, the Ellie that we have later is totally different from the Ellie earlier. And I know she's traumatized by what's happened with Joel, but I think we could have done with just a few more sprinkles of that light, that interest, that geeky kind of side of her, which we see a lot in the flashbacks. But there's a lot of mopey, depressed, angry Ellie in this. It's very engaging, but also I feel like we lost a little bit of what made her so dynamic. I don't know. Anyway, that's a small criticism. played by Troy Baker, is fantastic in this game. And if I didn't love Joel in the first game enough, I do even more now. And Troy Baker is incredible in this game. I feel like they switch roles in this game a lot. In the first game, Joel was the brooding, angry kind of the one that needed to turn in, and Ellie was the bright kind of the one that was kind of trying to get on his side. And then the kind of tables turn in this, and he's the one that's very wants her forgiveness and is sad and remorseful and regretful and pensive about what he's done and calm. And Ellie is more shut down more in this one. Okay, so another notable character from Ellie's part of the game especially is Jesse. Jesse is just a great character. He's not in it a lot, but he had this, I don't know, he just had this presence, and there was some mystique to him. Unfortunately, he dies an untimely death, but it's the Last of Us world, whatever. What can you do? But he was interesting. I interacting with him and him in the cutscenes, I just thought that he had like a presence. I'm going to now explain was lacking, I think, in the other characters. So on to the next one. Tommy's in it a bit. He's not in it that much, and you know, he plays a purpose, and you know, his performance is great, but you don't see him a lot, and you get this kind of disparate, oh, he's this way and now he's this way, and there's story beats to explain that. But and then of course Dina, who is very significant to Ellie. She's basically her girlfriend in this. Dina was okay for me. She was serviceable, you know, but I didn't gravitate towards her a lot. I don't know if she had a lot of presence about it. I didn't really care for Dina that much. I did in the pregnancy reveal bit, and I felt for like the vulnerability of the situation. I was like, shit, she's pregnant, and my God, they're out here in this thing. But there's a lot of this theme in this game seems to be pregnant people being silly and being irresponsible with that responsibility. And we find out that Dina sort of maybe suspected she was pregnant and went on this revenge journey with Ellie. And then it's not until, you know, a day in, she's like, I can't, I'm too exhausted. And they find out, it comes out that she's pregnant. She has to just rest and relax. I think for the most part, the people that Ellie comes across it's decent, you know. The charisma on display isn't quite there like it was in the first game with Joel and Ellie, the main characters. And every character that we came across in the first game was very memorable and likable. I don't feel like the same can be said here, especially on Abby's side. So once we pick up with Abby halfway through the game, we are introduced to WLF and the group that helped her kill Joel that are present at that point. And the game goes about kind of trying to humanize that group. But they don't do a great job of it, and this is the reason why. Immediately off the bat, we find out that, you know, Ellie kills the two guys, Owen and Mel, and Mel turns out to be pregnant under a coat, and Ellie's devastated at the end of her campaign. So we get introduced retrospectively 3 days earlier to Mel and the other members of the group in this big, huge WLF safe base facility. And we see Mel, the character, knowingly go on the mission with them, getting armed and ready. And like one of the characters makes a comment like, you shouldn't be going out, you're pregnant. But none of the characters make a big deal out of it. Abby says something, and then Manny, who's another member of the group, who's the one that kind of spits on Joel a few times, who just isn't likable in this game at all. He sort of questions Abby, and he's like, oh, she can do what she wants. And I'm like, what?
But why she has to come? I don't get it. She's pregnant.
Hi. Hey. I actually cleared you for active duty. Barely. You could probably get a stay if you ask. I'd rather not sit around if I don't have to. No one's okay with this? Why would it be up to Owen? We need to grab Alice on our way.
Hey. Do better.
What is wrong with these fucking girls with babies? They just can't leave it, can they?
Oh, it's like
Fucking stay out of it.
They're being so selfish, don't they?
Yeah.
They're carrying a living creature inside their belly. Oh.
And in this world where like they've finally got places where they can stay safe.
Yeah, just stay there.
There's no excuse,
Because
is there?
Once you step out your comfort zone, that's it. You might get caught.
You can't be, yeah.
You might get killed by who maybe by scars,
Yeah.
some trespasser, or by infection. Who knows?
Yeah.
So
And
I'm
then
not-
we can't be mourning and going,
so-
oh no, the scar shot us with the arrow and the baby.
Yeah.
It's like, well, why were you out?
Well, I'm not. To be honest, I'm not sorry. Like,
I actually agree.
She
actually
got
agree.
killed by Ellie.
It's sad that she lost
And
it with
also,
the baby.
like, how could Ellie know that she's pregnant?
And she was at the aquarium. It's like, what are you doing there? What are you doing there? That's not safe.
Well, he's...
I would have, you see, if I'd written this, if I was Neil Druckmann, I would have written it so that the woman was pregnant, but she was there for some reason that she had to be. Like, she got caught there or something like that. Instead of her choosing to be out there, it kind of undermines our sympathy for it.
Yeah.
Because it makes us feel like, well,
Well,
what the
like,
fuck do you expect? You know this world.
You have a choice where you
Yeah.
can just stay.
Yeah, and you
your
just
base.
went out and you were just stood there while pregnant while she was bashing in Joel and getting revenge. And like, you know that the chances are that they might come back for you. So it's dangerous, isn't it? Like, why isn't that guy saying it as well? He's like, oh, be nice to her. It's like, no, tell her to stay. Just tell her, no, you're not allowed to leave. If you're pregnant, that's the rule. You don't leave. When you've given birth, then you can. Like, even Dina pissed me off. Like, but even with Dina, at least they left her at the theatre, didn't they?
Yeah.
They said, don't fucking come, you know. And she was only like, she wasn't even showing. She's got a fucking bump. What are you doing? Bump, yeah. No, because think about it though.
Wow.
Think about all the athleticism you need as well when you're going out on the thing, like, and you're like, I'm getting contractions. Fucking. Yeah, that infuriates me.
Mel's pregnant.
She could use the fresh air. Give you two a chance to talk.
Real subtle, eh?
Bloody stupid idiot. Sorry, but I can't get over that, how stupid that is. No. And, like, it makes even less sense, because look how many fucking people they've got. So it's like, it's not like they can't find somebody else that's, you know, capable.
Have you been sleeping? You okay? Yeah.
Fucking scars.
How far away from the fob?
Idiot.
It's a hike.
Absolute
Too exposed.
And I think I know what Neil Druckmann would say, which is that it is justifiable in the story because Owen has left the WLF and he's distanced and she is dating him, and she knows that if she stays at the WLF and then the tensions rise, then she's going to be stuck there, and that's why she goes on it. But at that moment, as a player, they don't know that. And the problem is that you cause a huge, fissure between the player and that what you're trying to do, which is to create empathy. For better or for worse, these people don't have to be all perfect and moral, but they have to be likable for the player to... And the first thing you see is them making shitty decisions that make no sense. You know how dangerous it is out there. And Mel just comes across as a bland idiot, to be honest. And it's annoying. It's just annoying. And you're like, okay, so Manny's not really a great guy because he's just like not asked about this girl who's blatantly, hugely pregnant and knows how dangerous it is. And then Mel is just kind of selfish in her action to want to go and see Owen, go on this mission and doesn't want to be left out. Madness. So it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, so that's basically Abby's crew, and it's not the best in terms of how they are portrayed. Owen is introduced, but he's introduced as like Abby's kind of love interest and reason for being disillusioned and questioning the WLF. But that's done in a very clunky style way, in the same way that Ellie's campaign has these flashbacks where we see, Joel and her's relationship over the years being explored in more detail and given more relevant context. We have the same thing between Abby and Owen, but these feel a bit cumbersome and overly long, and just, I think it's information and context that we could have gotten in a briefer, easier to digest package. It just feels at that point that there's just too much being fed our way. Because not only are these flashbacks between Owen that are flashbacks to flash forwards to this time and all this lot, Abby's adventure takes a few other turns where she basically, the thrust of her journey is about her rediscovering her humanity after doing such a kind of inhumane act or cold-blooded act, which is murder Joel at the beginning of the game, where she comes across Yara and Lev, who are these vulnerable Seraphites who have been, labelled as apostates, and, been cast out from the religious cult. And now the Seraphites are pitched as this kind of misguided but very violent cult with their own religious leader, and they're fighting against the WLF. Abby becomes quite close to them as I think she's rescued by them, and then she rescues them, and they go on this big adventure. And Yara and Lev are actually probably the best characters that are featured in Abby's campaign and the most interesting. The problem is that by the time we get to that point, that takes a while to be explored, but you're just a little bit exhausted and you're not really sure where your attention's supposed to be and how is this factoring into the main story. And it's more of a universal thing that, you know, Abby's adventure isn't necessarily linked in any concrete way to Ellie at this point. It's just basically, this is Abby's journey. While that's good, and then there are great moments, like there's a moment where you explore a Seraphite skyscraper and you witness Abby's fear of heights and you start to get to know Lev, and it's a really clever bit, but you feel the kind of cogs turning by that point because you've been playing for so long. You feel that kind of, okay, right, they're doing this, we're having moments together and stuff like that. That's when things click with Abby, but it's just you've been playing it for so long. And then when you finally get, and you're thinking, when's it coming? We're going to get to the point where Abby meets Ellie, at the point where you left at Ellie, where are we going to catch up? And then there's this huge big bit where we actually get to see the Seraphite Island, which I couldn't wait. You know, I wanted to see where the Seraphites were from. I wanted to meet their religious leader and find out more about that. But I found that when we got to the island, it felt a little bit hollow and empty. And, you know, we see the architecture of it, which is interesting, but the same fights occur. You know, it's more of the same that you've been doing the whole game. And maybe because I was playing on normal, but I found those bits kind of a little bit, I don't know, mind numbing. I don't know. You know, most of the indigenous people, you see the sort of evidence of the way they live, but you don't get to see it in action. And I wanted to see that. I wanted to see what their customs were like in general. I thought we might sneak in there, but it just so happens to be at the point when the WLF are mounting their huge attack, and you know, you do get to leave the island in this big dramatic way, which is very Uncharted in its thing, but very violent and visceral. So, you know, those bits have impact, but not as much impact as you would hope. And I was really trying. It was almost like trying to, you know, enjoy a drive, but you've been on the drive for 6 hours and you're just falling asleep and you're slapping your cheeks to wake up. There's just something about it that was missing. And I don't know if that was maybe just the first time playing it. Maybe I didn't take enough breaks. It could have been something to do with the difficulty, because what I will say, and when I come to the gameplay, I'll say more about it, but when I went back and played it on Survivor, it was more engaging. The first time you play it, you don't want to be scrounging for materials, but we'll talk about that. So anyway, I've talked about the characters. The cast this time in general, I feel, compared to the first game, are more of a mixed bag. In the first game, I couldn't name you one character that I didn't like or I didn't find interesting or well written or misplaced or boring or forgetful. But in this game, I feel like there are a lot of characters that either feel a little bit, you know, forgetful or replaceable or just downright confusing as to what we're supposed to be feeling towards them, right? Abby, for sure, is one of the strongest characters, and I really liked Abby by the end. I think that she's really well played, and you really, by the end, you really do feel for her. When you get to the climax of Abby's campaign, you end up having to fight Ellie, which is a bizarre experience. That boss fight with Ellie was a disconcerting one, and not one that I enjoyed an awful lot, if I'm honest. That was at the point of the game where I kind of understand what's being tried to be conveyed, but because you're being incentivized to root simultaneously for two characters, I felt this weird disconnect between, you know, it's been so long since I played as Ellie and I feel disconnected from that, but then now I'm seeing Ellie again but as an antagonist, but I don't know how I feel about that because I can see both sides, but it's like you have to you're forced to play it. You're not just seeing it take place.
What?
Not happy about it.
You're not happy about it. I mean,
You started first, Abby. You start this war.
Don't you fucking run!
I mean, I don't want to really fire at Ellie. I mean, I get both. Jesus, it is actually Ellie versus Abby. Fuck me. Oh my god! The fuck?
Oh no.
Oh my god, I'm running away from fucking Ellie. She's there. What the fuck? This is mad. This is fucking mad.
And then there's the other twist, which is that Abby doesn't kill her. And the one look at Lev reminds her that, no, don't be that, And then we get Ellie on the farm with Dina. And I thought that was quite clever. But then when Ellie decides to go back, it was like I was shouting at the screen. I suppose these reactions were what was intended by Neil Druckmann. He wanted the game to feel controversial and the player to have mixed feelings about what was happening. And you do feel like that. You're like, Ellie, what are you doing?
Traded with while he was moving through California. Described her as built like an ox, traveling with a kid with scars across his face.
Abby.
He said we're living along this coast in a beach sailboat right here.
No, wait, stop. No more revenge. Done. It's done. We're so lucky we've got what we've got from this. Dina's alive. She's had the baby. I know Abby beat Joel to death, but in a way, that was like Joel sacrificed himself for Ellie. That's basically it. It's just that he died 4 years later instead of straight away. So like and Abby had cause to do it, right? He killed her dad. He killed everything her dad fought for and stuff. I'm not saying that I don't like what Abby did at all. I don't agree with what Abby did, even to start with. Because we're going to do it all over again now. We're going to go and kill loads of other people now, and then I don't know how that's. I mean, I know she's having panic attacks and stuff like that, but how is killing Abby going to solve that? Then there's going to be that kid there, that Scars kid who lost his mum, and she's going to have to kill him as well. I mean, it's just like
almost to the point where you started to dislike Ellie as a character. You almost felt like, oh God, you're making so many bloody mistakes and you're finally safe. I think in the first game, I think they worked so hard to portray the world as dangerous, right? And just survival was a desirable outcome. So safety was a desirable outcome. And in this, it feels like a lot of the time there are characters that just throw themselves out in the world so carelessly. And sometimes it feels like, is this just because it serves the story? Because I don't know if people would do this, but maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. But one thing I did like was that, some people are saying that Ellie wouldn't be as angry at Joel and they wouldn't have had that bitterness, because she is really bitter towards Joel once she finds out that he lied to her. But I can completely see why, and it suits her character completely, in my opinion, because lots of people were saying, I saw online a lot of people speculating about the story and saying, Joel did her a favour, why can't she see that? And it might not have worked, it might not have been the cure, but that's not the point. The point is that in this world, people die every day for no reason. They get scratched, infected, and that's the end. Boom. Or they get shot by a bloody cannibal or one of the Seraphites or whatever, and their life's over. So in this world, to die for something, even if it's not 100% thing, to die at a shot at being the cure for humanity is a big deal, right? And Joel took that choice away from her. So in that sense, I understand the frustration, and then not only that, it recontextualizes everything after that Ellie sees. When she sees a couple that have died, when you're playing as Joel and Ellie, there's a moment when they find a group or a couple who went out to try and they left the safety of Jackson, the confinement of Jackson, to try and better the world. They felt guilty. And then one of them got infected and they both ended up having to kill themselves. And she sees that and she thinks to herself, she's got that survivorship guilt, that survivor's guilt that basically Joel has given to her, right? So, you can understand why Joel did it. To understand Ellie's outrage is not to not understand why Joel did it. You can still say, I would have done what Joel did every time. But you also have to acknowledge that he kind of did it for himself, and that you can understand why she would be angry, and that maybe one day she will forgive him. And it makes the story tragic. It does make the story tragic. It's what feeds perhaps her revenge even more, that she has the guilt that she kind of blamed him up until the moment he died, and she never got that chance to apologise to him, I guess, maybe. I don't know. And then finally, in the last act, we get this kind of Rambo-style mission where Ellie finally, tracks down Abby again, and we're in Santa Monica, and there's a new faction of enemies. And while this mission, this level design was great, well handled, there were things where there's actual tied up, infected, that you can set loose on the guys there on the compound. It just feels that by that point I was quite tired of it all.
This is a long ass game, isn't it? Fucking hell! I thought we were done.
So what? Just.
I thought we were. Am I gonna be playing as fucking?
Check this
Oh
street.
God! It's doing me in this because I just don't really know how to feel anymore.
Then Ellie confronts Abby and forces her to fight her, and it's kind of like, oof, and it made me feel, you know, oof, kind of sick. I was just like,
I can't let you leave. I'm not doing this.
Ellie, you can't win.
no. And I really felt for Abby at that point, because I felt like, okay, Abby's further down the road than her. You know, she's had the revenge and she's realised it doesn't work for her. And not that it doesn't work, but that there's nowhere to go in that. It's not satisfying. And she found another purpose to live through that Lev. And they still fight anyway, and you think they're going to die, and she almost kills them, and then she can't, and then that's it. The kind of game ends with Ellie walking off into the distance, letting them go, and it's a bit of a bittersweet ending, I guess. So that's the story, and overall it made me feel, you know, there was overarching messages, but I just felt like perhaps it could have been more efficiently told, a little bit more condensed. They could have linked Abby and Ellie in together more. I remember I heard a suggestion even from Angry Joe that said, you know, it would have been cool to have Ellie and Abby as sort of partners or friends, and that have some kind of falling out or some kind of realization later in the game. That would have been interesting. But anyway, this is the way it's been written, so anyway, having discussed the story, I want to talk about the gameplay, because the gameplay feeds into some of the great things about the game and some of the things that don't work, especially with the length. So, you know, this is quintessentially The Last of Us 1 gameplay, but improved in lots of ways. The gameplay mechanics are more fluid. There's more options to do what you can. So now you can go prone, you can crawl under things. The jump button is there. I mean, it's not, you know, massively useful in combat. It just means that, you know, there's more of a kind of vertical element to level design. But I think the two biggest additions are the dodge button, which adds a kind of dynamic element to the melee combat and gives you kind of fighting chance sometimes as well, and the size of the actual environments. Now, compared to in the first game, there were very linear areas that you would fight in, but in a lot of ways they were just big enough, right, to serve a purpose. And the way in which the game works, remember, this is an immersive game, but it's still a game. And The Last of Us is all about crafting materials. Now, the harder the difficulty you play on, the more scarce the materials. And you're finding everything from individual elements of an item to make one item. So you've got a bandage, you've got a shiv, you've got all the things. And you kind of combine them to make this or that, or, you know, whatever. So there is this natural gamey incentive that you have as you're going through the world. You've like, shit, did I check this? Did I check this? And you tap in triangle to pick things up. Now, in the first game, you would kind of, you know, clear an area, and then you would go back and kind of do a little bit of a loop and then carry on. And because those areas were quite condensed, it didn't feel like it was much of a detour, and it was kind of taking away from the, you know, the thrust of the story. But in The Last of Us Part 2, the areas are huge in comparison, very sprawling, so much so that as you're going through the game, and it's a bittersweet thing, and I don't know how they would get around this. It's great, and it's also not great. Like I said, bittersweet. So on the one hand, you know, in the first game, you really feel the constraints of it being a game. You can kind of feel where, oh, they want me to go this way. There isn't, you know, I can feel that even though I'm in a city, there's a very corridor sense to it. You know, even the more open bits feel constrained. This game has an amazing level design nature where there are multiple ways through that funnel you to the next part, but because you can get through them in multiple ways, the sense is that you're exploring, right? And you're just moving forward. And there's always this wonder of like, am I going the right way? Where the hell am I going, right? And it's very, very immersive, that in and of itself. However, you still have the same mechanic from the first game, which is this incentive to find stuff to crafting items all the time. So you're sort of hesitant to go into the next area and trigger the next moment where you can't backtrack. So I found myself sort of stressfully hesitating and waiting and then looking around every building and then sort of having to get a sort of mind map of where I was, which created this, it's almost like feeling out the constraints, feeling out the parameters of the map to then make sure you found everything to then move on. And it's this OCD nature that it kind of triggered in me. So it was like, oh, they've worked really hard to make this immersive sort of environment that makes it feel like if you would just play it the first time, you don't even, you can't even feel that there's a like a path even pushing you along. It just feels so organic. And yet at the same time, you've got this survival mechanic that is very gamey and that incentivizes searching every nook and cranny and not organically moving through it. And it can also interrupt those moments that are more scripted when you have to kind of, you're barreling towards an objective. There's this feeling of like, oh yeah, but what about the stuff? Or is this the right thing? And that can be a sort of an issue, I found. Not only that, obviously, if you clear like I said, if you clear an area of enemies, and now it's empty, and you can go around look for items. Before it would be a couple of minutes, you'd pick everything up. Now the area is so big, you're talking 10, 15 minutes of pressing the triangle button, looking through drawers and opening a drawer and it's empty, opening a cupboard and it's empty. That's fine for 8, 9, 10, 12 hours, but 15 hours, 18 hours, 20 hours, it starts to grind you down. And that's what I mean about when we pick up as Abby. It's the same structure. You're doing that same thing again, and you've just done it all as Ellie, and you think, oh, I've got to redo this with Abby. And yes, she's got new equipment, she's got a different fighting style, but it's similar enough to feel just a little bit samey, and you start to be able to see through the very, very carefully crafted magic trick. The illusion of realism is sort of punctured by the amount of time you spend in it, right? It's like, The Last of Us is a really immersive game. The first time I played it, I couldn't tell you where the triggers were in missions. I couldn't tell you, many limitations of enemy AI or little exploitations you can make in the gameplay to make it easier. But once you've played through it 3 times, on Grounded for the 3rd time, 4th, 5th time, you come to know those things, and the game is more transparent, the design of it. The problem is, the first time you play The Last of Us Part 2, that happens to you because you spend so long in that environment that you start to become a little bit jaded. That little element is heartbreaking because there has been so much work put into this. The environments are beautiful and amazingly designed. The level design is great in this game as well. And so onto the graphics. The graphics are flawless in this game. I really cannot criticize them in any way. They are just superb. The facial animations, the way the eyes move in cutscenes, are some of the best I've ever seen. In fact, they are the best I've ever seen. Such real emotion, like subtle emotion on Ellie's face when she's like broken or angry, but not, a stereotypical angry gnarl, but like you can see it in the eyes. Fantastic. The world is beautifully realised and every aspect of it is just beautiful to look at. There isn't really anything else to say. And it almost blew up my PS4 Pro, which I wasn't surprised it was going to do. But wow, what an achievement. To make that on a console is just incredible. In terms of audio design, this again is top notch. I cannot criticize this at all. The soundtrack to this game is fantastic. And returning is Gustavo, who does the kind of guitar music that is very prominent in the first game and return some of the motifs and themes. And they use Gustavo to evoke, the sort of more nostalgic, more gentler aspects and moments in the story. But then what they do really cleverly is, because this is a story of revenge and it's darker, they have those moments of dread orchestrated by, I think it's Matt Quayle, who has a more kind of synthy, like dread. It's less organic instruments, and it's a really great contrast and juxtaposition for the different moments in the game. The light moments are more Gustavo, and the darker moments are more like the Matt Quayle, the new style. And I really thought in this game the soundtrack stood out and bolstered the feelings that you were, the kind of unspoken kind of dread and the oh god, Ellie's going down a dark path kind of thing. Fantastic. I loved all that. Brilliantly done. The sound design's great. The voice, the AI talking to each other, saying each other's names, the gun sounds, the sounds of the infected are hideous, awful. One thing that I didn't mention was a moment in Abby's campaign that really stood out to me, and one of the highlights. And this was a moment that, made me forget about the fatigue that I was feeling and the fact that it was going on for so long. And it took me by surprise, which was introduced a new infected, and it's terrifying. When it's a whole section when Abby goes to the same hospital where Ellie found Nora and kills Nora. And you know that deep down in the hospital, they're infected. And it's the source of the infection in Seattle. And that whole bit was just on the level of the best horror games. Just the dread and the boss that you fight is just like, my girlfriend likes to watch me play these games. She loves horror games, but she literally made an excuse to go and wash her face in the bathroom during the whole bit. And I was so stressed out that I got my neck snapped so many times, and the animation was horrible to watch.
Yes.
Get ready to celebrate.
No.
You hear that?
What the hell?
Run.
No.
Put the headphones on.
You're torturing me. Oh shit!
But that was a standout moment. And I also want to mention the unfortunate, shitty abuse that Laura Bailey got, which is ridiculous, who plays Abby in this game. She plays an amazing character in this game. She's clearly a fan of the first game, and it's unacceptable, this kind of bullshit that we have in our gaming community, so to speak, that it should be on YouTube about celebration and it should be about honest critique. I understand that the importance of homegrown channels that don't have any interests like IGN could, or any bought kind of review sites, homemade review games and gaming journalism that's by the people for the people. That criticism is sometimes well needed. Take, for example, the malicious loot box bullshit that EA tried with Battlefront, and the community stood up in anger and we got it changed, and it's great. But I feel like that merges into toxicity sometimes, and that has created a real toxic bunch of people who should be ashamed of themselves, frankly. And let's not forget that these people are human beings who are actors and voice actors who didn't write the game, and even the writers themselves shouldn't suffer abuse. But what I'm saying is, you know, to blame a voice actor for things you don't agree with in a character is really pathetic. And yeah, and I just want to say Laura Bailey was great as Abby, and actually, you know, one of my favourite characters in the game. I've talked a lot about this game now. I've talked about the first game, how the controversy around it, the story, the gameplay, the characters, and now I have to come to some kind of verdict. And it's really difficult, really, really difficult, because some days I feel one way, and other days I feel like another way about it. My verdict for The Last of Us Part 2 is 4 cups out of 5. 4 cups out of 5. Now, I don't want to give 3.5s, you know, or anything like that. So it's between 3 cups and 4 cups out of 5. This definitely isn't a 5 cups out of 5 because of the shortcomings that I said. The reason why I rated it so highly is because the first half of the game is a great game in and of itself. If the game had stopped there and had some kind of climax from that point onwards, I would have been really impressed. My biggest criticism is that the game went on for too long, and the things that they did in the game just took too long. And maybe Abby should have had her own game separate to this, or they should have made each part more streamlined. I don't know. I don't know if there's a single solution, because it's all wrapped up together. But what I do appreciate is that Neil Druckmann and the team set their sights on a story they wanted to tell, and it's controversial, and that's what we want in the game. You know, we don't want games that just do what we expect. So it's good to see games that sometimes hit and sometimes miss. Without those risks, we don't get the great games. And I wouldn't say that Last of Us Part 2 hits the same heights as Part 1. And Neil Druckmann himself recently said in an interview that they knew that going in, that this one was going to be more messy, it was going to be more ambitious, that the first one was tight and concise and easier to get right, and this one wasn't going to be. But you know what? When you're making a sequel, that's what you got to do. You got to aim for you got to swing for the fences. If you're going to have another go at it, why not? Instead of more of the same. Unfortunately, some of those were swing and misses, but some of them weren't. Some of them were fantastic. And just to get a chance to revisit that world that they created again was great. And the moments that we got, the flashback moments with Joel and Ellie, were so great that alone was worth the price of admission. That 4 cups out of 5, it's for those moments. And people can say, well, yeah, but what about the rest of the game? You know, the rest of the game isn't terrible. It just isn't. The hatred of the game is unwarranted, frankly. It really, really is. And this review bombing is ridiculous. And that's not to say you can't have your own opinion. Absolutely. You know, some people hate this game. Okay, that's fine. And if I'd have hated it, I would have said it. There's no, reason why people shouldn't be able to say their own opinion. And it seems like Naughty Dog want to hear the people's honest reactions to it. So yeah, The Last of Us Part 2, 4 cups out of 5. I hope it maybe in the future we'll see another installment. We'll see what they come up with. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more content on video games and movies. I also have a Twitch stream channel which I stream often, and that is twitch.tv/Sam's Cup of Tea. So please give me a follow on that, and that would be greatly appreciated. Okay, thank you. Sam's Cup of Tea, signing off.
Sam's Cup of Tea.